I've been asked to do a video on doing edging of the pond, how to hide your liner. Probably one of the most important parts of building a pond. How do you make it look like it's always been here? How do you make it look like it's not added on to the area? Well, in my eyes, having the rock touching from one rock to another, to another, to another, looks man-made. You can see those two rocks there. There's a good 1.5 feet in between them. There's nothing but fabric below them. And I have moss growing there. You can see a little bit of the fabric at the bottom there. I have some pesky birds that keep coming around and they pull the moss up. And a woodchuck as well. And that's why you can see it there. But otherwise, normally you can't see anything. This section right here, from this rock to this rock, that section is nothing but cinder block below with fabric and the liner draped over. So this entire area right here is nothing but fabric. From that fern all the way over to that tree stump. Put some moss on it, let it grow. Some lining stone crop has taken root, as well as some fern. It's taken about 4 years, but the look is, to me, better than any two rocks put together. This rock here I have jogging out into the pond. It's actually a open area below it, and the moss loves that as well. Just adding a totally dead piece of wood. There's nothing alive to it. A little bit of lichen growing on it. The base of my umbrella is this area right here. Ferns growing over it, some driftwood covered in moss. It's, in my eyes, absolutely gorgeous. Don't have to worry about watering anything. Even when the rocks are together. Rubbing a little bit of moss on the rock. Some will take, some won't. These rocks here are actually about 3 feet tall. Actually, that one's only about 2 feet tall. It's sitting on top of some rocks down below. So instead of piling rocks on top of each other and having the smaller ones on top, the smaller ones are supporting the big one, lifting it up. And then I had a nice piece of driftwood added up top. The pond itself, water levels itself on. But my landscape was not. That end of the patio was about a foot higher than where I'm standing. So in order to make up for that, I built a retaining wall all along this edge. And of course I made it a little bit higher, making it a little tougher for any blue heron to come by. If your walls are 2 to 3 feet higher than the water's edge and almost vertical, the heron will have a hard time getting any fish. Over at the patio, fortunately we haven't seen any over there. It's so close to the house, I think they're very afraid to do so. Then on the other side, That rock there is about 6.5, 7 feet long. It goes from inside the fern there all the way to this rock over here. Alright, too close. That one. That rock is so large, it's about 1.5 foot thick, that I decided to put in a concrete bond beam underneath that. So that rock has a footing below it, so it'll never fall in the pond and it will never hurt anybody. At the end of that, actually in between the two rocks I'm showing right now, a skimmer's in there, my old skimmer. It's not used anymore, unfortunately. The pond was reworked and pulling in that area just wasn't in the cards. I made a intake bay, which is in this area behind this bush. That's the opening to my intake bay. About 1.5 feet wide and about 6 inches tall. The fish go swimming through there, no problem. And on the inside, to hide the liner, I built another stone wall. This one's more of a traditional stone wall. And the fabric and liner are draped in between that and the large rocks to the pond, making for a nice, very nice natural looking retaining wall. Looks like it's always been here. We got all kinds of moss. I love moss. I think it's one of the most underrated plants there is. The redbud is actually planted right up against the side of the liner. But before I put the liner in place, I used 1/8 inch construction roofing deck. It's actually a asphalt membrane on fiberglass, and I don't think the roots can grow through that, so that is along, it's actually bent along the curve of the pond, standing vertically, so that the roots cannot get through to the liner. And so far so good. 6 years later, that bush is more than double in size, and when it flowers, it's absolutely gorgeous. The other thing I have is all this creeping jenny. That stump and this blue labellus is all in the pond. Even though the rocks look like that's the edge of the pond, it's not. Those rocks are sitting in on a shelf. I don't know if you can see the gravel there inside the pond. Those rocks are sitting on that shelf, and then the water is allowed to come behind it. And those rocks, the small ones there, are actually the retainer, where the liner is folded up against those. So all the creeping jenny and this plant, every plant in this area gets its own water from the pond. Don't have to do anything. This rock as well, not as much. And then just small pieces of driftwood with some moss on it, some roots. Looks fantastic. The other thing too, in your plantings, so many people just do one plant, maybe two, into an area. If you make mass plantings, it really draws the eye. It looks so much more attractive and natural. All the taro over there, black taro, it gets a little more sun than it would like. It's a little bit yellow because it's being bleached out. That and our temperatures have not been warm for the last week. We've been in the 70s, high 70s, low 80. And I think I planted 10 plants in all to make that wall. And over the other side, that piece of driftwood, that side and the liner on that side. And the liner is actually folded up behind it. The log is actually into the water. If wood stays constantly wet, it will not rot out very quickly. It'll take years and years for it to rot out. Excuse me. A pitcher plant bog. The liner is actually 6 inches below the base of the pond there, where I have about 2 inches of rock on top of the liner, which then I have a mixture of peat and coarse sand. And you can see for yourself, the pitcher plants definitely love it. They've done very well there. I don't have to do anything to them. Don't fertilize them. The insects seem to be plentiful to feed the entire area. Now, they're not as beautiful as the ones I've seen with Modern Design Aquascape, but I'm not complaining. I don't have the kind of heat that John has down in Tennessee. Underneath all that greenery right there is a flat rock. I put some moss on there, and the wild creeping Charlie is what it's called. I have that on my entire property. I have stopped fighting it, and I have started embracing it and letting it grow in certain areas. And I think it looks pretty good. Using old, rotted out tree stumps, indispensable in my book. I mean, I love it. And trees with moss on it, making it look like the stream falls in from the waterfall here. And on any stream that gets a quick downpour and flooding, you always have some wood at the end. So it's the attention to detail. Again, the mass plantings. That's an entire flat of impatiens. And I fertilized them once. Put some good soil in, and away she goes. Now this area here, wondering why I'm showing it, there's actually a cistern below here. 12 foot by 12 foot. 3,000 gallons. And that's how the water gets in there. It's an overflow. So the pond itself, from the intake bay, overflows into that waterfall, into that small area, which is probably my biggest flaw in the entire design of this pond. Should have been 3 times that size. It is about 2.5 feet deep, but still not enough. There's a 2-inch line in there, which then goes over to the garage, which is what those logs are hiding. Where they come up and go into the garage, instead of burying them or cutting in through the concrete. They got creative. I like it. That's my bog area. There's actually mafia blocks behind all that rock that go up to the tree stump. I'm sorry, not tree stump, the log going across there. And then from there up is just a conventional wood frame with pressure treated with 2 layers of 3/4 inch plywood, and the liner is draped over both sides all the way down to the bottom of the bog and up over the bog down to the ground level. So the pressure treated is basically in a house. The other thing I should mention, it doesn't show very well. I'll talk about that some other time. I was going to mention how I work with smaller stones in the what we call dead pool, which is the intake bay. Another one of my favorite areas, and is the wife's favorite area, is what she calls Hobbit Falls. The rock that's barely sticking up out of the water there is actually about 1.5 feet tall and a good 4.5 feet long. I took a bib liner and made it so that the waterfall coming out of there, just a trickle, hits that bib liner and comes over the top of the rock, which definitely makes it look more natural. Doesn't look like it was planned. It's not a sheet flow coming out of the waterfall, which is the same with that waterfall. It could be better. It could be a complete, even sheet of water going across there. The side has a little bit of area where it's not dropping, but it constantly changes from the amount of algae or the plants that grow up top there. It always changes. Come to the conclusion, a few fish need to find a new home. The fish are getting quite large. All this greenery right here is actually inside the upper pond. Looks like a stream right there, but it's not. The whole area is a pond. As I'm stepping on frogs all over the place. Oh, a big one just jumped in. This whole area is it starts here at about a foot deep. It goes to about 8 inches on that end, where it falls down into Hobbit Falls. Kind of a algae scrubber. Any sediment that comes down the stream, if it goes into this direction, it's definitely coming out clean water on the other end. The roots are incredibly thick. And on this end, these rocks are sitting on a shelf, and the creeping Jenny has called it home. So it's much smaller leaf, and these night crawlers are unbelievably quick around here. And the funny thing is, they don't mind going in the water. Over on that side of the pond, you can see the rock over here. It actually jogs out into the pond, and then it goes all the way back to the edge of the liner and the pond, where another rock is turned coming into the pond as well. So putting the rocks end to end, long way to long way, just doesn't look right. Kind of like this area here. The rocks are somewhat end to end, but not really. They're all at different angles. Frogs sure don't mind it. My stream's getting rather thin from the forget-me-nots taking over with a little bit of bog bean. And again, where the tips of the coral bells right there, those flowers, underneath there, the water goes all the way back to the coral bell. The tall grass there, that's actually growing in the pond, but you'd never know the water was that far back. Not from here anyways. Watch out, Mr. Frog. It's gonna come your way. I had to harvest some of the I forget what they're called. Obedience plants. They had taken over this entire corner. All that water area there was completely overgrown with it. You can see how thick the roots are and why an ecosystem pond is so successful. Not much is going to get through that root system without being completely filtered and cleaned. The main bog. Main bog is 20 feet long and about 7 feet deep. I used large aqua blocks down below, and then I used 3 to 4 inch around that with 2 to 3, about 4 inches, and then there's a good 24 inches of not Delaware River rock, but New England River rock. This area here is really doesn't have a name. It's the bogs that use PVC pipe across the bottom, and it works just fine. You see the plants don't have any complaints, and neither do the Japanese beetles, who will absolutely annihilate this plant. It's still getting flowers, but the leaves are sure taking a beating. Another thing I did for edging, that right there is just bark. I don't know what type of tree it was. I think cherry. And when the cherry is cut, after about 6 months, the bark pretty much peels away from the tree itself. I soaked the bark for about, 3 weeks, got it so it was pliable, and then I bent it over the top of the wall, which was a 2x4 wall. You'd never know. The impatiens. Most people have to water their impatiens constantly. I've never watered up here at all. We've had a pretty good wet summer this year, and they've taken care of themselves. So that's about it in a nutshell. It's been 25 minutes. Holy moly. If anyone's left watching this, Sorry it took so long. Happy funding.